welcome. Thank you for clicking on this video. If you're new here, hello, my name is Anne. If you're not new, welcome back, my friends. Today we are talking about the 7 books I read in June. So I have little summaries for you, pros and cons, and my overall thoughts. And I think we're gonna have a lot of fun today. So if you are into books and reading and all of those types of things, please join our little club. We would love to have you. And I think with that being said, let's jump right in. So the first book I read at the very beginning of the month was The Mermaid Chair by Sue Monk Kidd. I'm gonna rate this book at 4.5 stars. The basis of this book is you have a woman, her name is Jessie, and she ends up having an affair with a monk. Basically she gets a call from sort of her estranged family, and her mother had done some things, inflicted some self-harm, and so she kind of goes out to her home, like this little island that they live on, and she sort of reconnects with her mom, tries to figure out like why her mom did this, and kind of explores her identity a little bit. She has been essentially her whole life a housewife, a mother, a wife, and she kind of has to figure out what she wants in her life, and that leads to sort of an affair with this monk. Now, I'm not ruining anything for you. That is the very first sentence of the book is about the affair with the monk, but it's really a book about self-discovery, and I think this pressure that we feel to fulfill the roles that society says we should fill, and kind of a reflection on what that means once we've completed those, checked off those boxes, and we are left with us. And maybe we haven't spent the time to understand who we are and what we want. So the pros of this book, I really like Sue Monk Kidd's writing. I think that she has a way of writing that is almost simplistic, but not juvenile. It's very simple, but it hits hard is how I would describe it. I think that this book was like a commentary on what it means for us to achieve the things that we feel like we should achieve, and is that really what we want and should be doing with our lives. And I think that that was an interesting topic to kind of talk about. I also liked, there was a little bit of a mythical feel here with the mermaid chair and the legend behind the mermaid chair. There was also this really powerful sisterhood between Jessie's mom and some friends, and I thought that that was really well done. Overall, I think the book was an entertaining read, and it wasn't too long. It was a pretty quick read, but I feel like it was, for such a short book, there was really a lot of heavy hitting topics in it. Cons, I think that because this book was a little bit shorter, it was a little bit simpler, it almost could have been built out more. It could have been a longer story. There could have been, more pages to the book, so on and so forth. But I think that's almost one of the the magical things about Sue Monk Kidd's writing, is that she doesn't need 50 million pages to kind of describe what she's talking about. She can do it very concisely, and so I don't know that that's necessarily a con. Overall, I think it was a really good book, and if you haven't read it, I would recommend reading this book for sure. The next book I read was How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. So this book gets, again, 4.5 stars. I have read a book by Grady Hendrix. I read the Southern Book Club's Guide to Hunting Vampires or something like that, but I really liked that book. So when I saw this book at the library, I was like, ooh, I'm gonna give this a shot, and I was not disappointed. This book is fun, it's a little bit spooky, and essentially this book is about a daughter and her brother, and their parents passed away, and they're essentially trying to get the house ready for sale. Come to find out that there's sort of a haunting in the house. I won't really say much more than that, but they are trying to kind of work through this so that they can sell the house. Also, the main character, the woman, is sort of coming to terms with the fact that the world is not as black and white as it seems, and so she's sort of struggling through this self journey there as well. So the prose, it's a good book. I think this would be such a good book to read around Halloween. It was a little bit creepy. It was entertaining, it was engaging. Once you kind of hit the like half to like 3/4 in, it was just like all downhill from there. Like you couldn't stop reading, so it was really enthralling. And I think so far everything that Grady Hendrix has written is just like a romp, is how I would describe it. The cons for this book, there really aren't cons per se. There were a couple of like loose ends that I feel like weren't really tied up. The second thing was that you could kind of see where the book was going before you got there. You could sort of predict the ending, which was okay because the book was still entertaining. I do wish that Mercy and sort of the family had a little bit more like screen time. I thought that their dynamic was really interesting, and Constance, I wanted to know more about Constance, and I kind of wanted to delve into the family history a little bit more. Overall, I would highly recommend reading this book, especially if you like spooky things, if you're like that Halloween girly, if you enjoy anything written by Grady Hendrix, highly recommend reading this book. The next book I read was The Hidden Staircase. It's the second in the Nancy Drew series, and it is by Carolyn Keene. This book gets like 3 stars. It's not, you know, a literary work of art, but it's fun, it's entertaining, and I think for like a young adult book, it was, I just love all the Nancy Drew books. So essentially, Nancy Drew is a detective, and she is called out to her friend's mansion because they're thinking that it's haunted, they're hearing noises, the music is going off, and all these kinds of things. So she is essentially piecing together like what's happening in this mansion, and it's also tying in as well with some business dealings that her father is going through, and so it's sort of a Nancy has to piece together sort of what's happening. In terms of prose, this book is just fun. It's a fun young adult book. It's nostalgic, it takes you back. It really kind of makes me think about what it would be like to live in the days in which like Nancy Drew is living. I don't really have any cons for this book. Again, like you know what you're getting into. So I think it's a fun book. I actually listened to the audiobook. It was like 3 hours or so. It was a quick read, and it was just a fun way to pass the time. The next book I read was The Silver Chair. That is part of the Chronicles of Narnia, and of course it is by C.S. Lewis. So I would rate this book probably a 3. It's a young adult, you know what you're getting into. It's a fun read and it's entertaining. So in this book, we have Eustace again, my very favorite, and he joins a classmate. They are swept away to Narnia, and essentially they are going on the hunt for Caspian's son. So this book takes place like quite a long time after the voyage of the Dawn Treader. So Caspian is all grown up, he's like an old man essentially, and his son has disappeared, and so Eustace and his friend Jill have to essentially find the heir to the throne. So we basically follow them as they make their way through these like different lands. They go through this like giant country, and they meet a certain cast of characters along the way, one of which, and he actually accompanies them along their journey, is a marsh wiggle. So prose for this book, obviously we get to be with my BFF Eustace. If you watched the last book review, you will know that I love Eustace. I think he is great. And also I think the marsh wiggle is just hilarious. I love him. I think he's such a unique character. The only con that I really have is that I wish there had been a little bit more with the witch. There's like a witch who took the heir to the throne. She kidnapped him essentially. And I really wish that she had had her seen a little bit more. We don't really hear too much about her. We meet her a couple of times, but she has a very minimal part in the book, and I think that really could have been built out, and she could have been a formidable foe. Overall, a fun book, a great addition to the Chronicles of Narnia, and I also listened to this on audiobook, so I loved it. It was great, so I'd recommend if you're looking for something entertaining to pass the time. The next book I read was The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. I'm gonna give this book like probably like a 3.5 out of 5. I love Beth O'Leary, I love her writing, and I really want to give it a 4, but the plot, which I'll get into in a second, was just a little bit strange for me, so I think that I'm gonna stick with a 3.5. So essentially, you have the main character, Addie, and she is essentially stuck in the car with one of her exes, Dylan, and the book shifts perspective from like present day where she's in the car with her sister Deb, Dylan, and then his friend Marcus, and also this random guy named Rodney. And then also you'll shift back in time to like when Addie met Dylan and how their relationship began, and kind of like see what happened in their relationship because they're obviously no longer together. So in terms of pros, I think that the plot, like the whole idea of being in a car ride together with your ex and like not really being able to get out of that car and like being stuck with them, this sort of like angst and frustration and like awkwardness that arises is actually really comical and funny. And I thought it was an interesting sort of dynamic to have in a book. I also think that it was engaging how we kind of kept switching back from present day to like past. It was an interesting way to keep the reader engaged and to kind of help us understand what was going on that led obviously to present day. In terms of cons, I really felt there were a couple of pieces in the book in the storyline that made me feel like uncomfortable. So the first one is one of the things, there's this strange sort of tension almost between Dylan and Marcus. And one of the reasons is because they were like sort of dating the same girl at the same time. So I guess Marcus started dating Grace and then Dylan started dating Grace or slept with Grace or something. And it was this whole thing of like, Marcus is like, what's mine is yours. And so they weren't in an open relationship and they weren't in like a polyamorous relationship. They were just sleeping with the same woman at the same time. And like absolutely no shade if that's your jam. It just felt a little bit weird because it was hard to sort of understand like what's happening in this dynamic here. I also think that Marcus in general, he's sort of the antagonist throughout the book in a way. He is really hard to like. I know that is on purpose because he's the antagonist, but he says certain things and does certain things and is very almost like very definitely struggling with his mental health in a lot of ways. And I think he puts a lot of that on Dylan and his friends. And I mean, at the end of the book, you kind of see that there might be some like transformation in his future, which is great, but perhaps it's because I have dealt with people like that, but I really didn't like him. I didn't feel like the actions that he made were forgivable, and I didn't really feel like IRL, if that person was in my life, I would want to continue having that person in my life, if that makes any sense. So I think from a perspective of like a reader, it was really hard to like get behind the decisions that Dylan and Addie make in support of Marcus, like later on in the book. And so because of that, I almost just felt like anything to do with Marcus, I just really struggled to get through because I did not like him. I also think the like plot twist, if you will, with Rodney was a little bit strange. I won't say what happens, but I really liked Rodney and I wanted him to continue being this wonderful, lovely person that we sort of fall in love with at the beginning. And he is in a way, he does in a way stay that friendly guy, but I was a little bit disappointed with how she wrote Rodney. So overall, if you're into like chick lit, if you like Beth O'Leary, definitely add this one to your collection. Just go in knowing that it's a little bit different from the other things of hers that you may have read. All right, moving on to Thistlefoot by GennaRose Nethercott. Overall, I would give this book like 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was really fun. It was really entertaining. There really wasn't anything that hindered my enjoyment of the book, and I thought it was a really great read. I would describe this book as also a fun romp, sort of tying in with that like Halloween-y, spooky vibe as the Grady Hendrix book. It's also a little like whimsical and fantastical. There's some like lore kind of wrapped in there. So essentially we have a gal and her brother. They essentially inherit the Baba Yaga house, the one, you know, the cottage with chicken legs that we've all heard about, and they inherit that house and come to find out that there's sort of a demon guy thing that's after the house. And the house is obviously a living creature, and so we actually get the perspective of the house, we get the perspective of these two siblings, and then we also get a perspective from this evil guy. And along the way, we meet a different cast of characters, and we kind of understand what the history of the house, the brother and sister, their reason for being, if you might. They have like certain abilities that make them unique, and we kind of learn why they have these abilities and like what the purpose behind their like uniqueness is. I'm trying really hard to describe this without ruining anything, so sorry if that was confusing. I'm just gonna tell you to read the book. It was a great book. I think in terms of prose, so much fun, such a fun book. I loved the Baba Yaga retelling. So you may have heard some things about Baba Yaga, and essentially GennaRose Nethercott takes the story and flips it on its head, and you get actually different perspectives of this Baba Yaga tale told different times throughout the book by the house itself, because the house itself narrates part of the book, which is really cool. I also really liked deep down, so this book actually is a commentary on you know, in a way, genocide and some like historical things that happen in real life. And so I really thought it was interesting, and it was really fascinating how the author took this tale, this like folklore tale of Baba Yaga, and she sort of wove that into our actual history and like actual past events. Cons, I struggled a little bit with Isaac. He's the brother. He was definitely selfish and definitely like an all for himself kind of guy. So there were times where it was frustrating to read from his point of view. I almost wish that some of his like narration would have been cut out because it was just frustrating. I think in that same vein, there were times where his like telling of things almost held up the story a little bit. So there were a couple parts where the pacing was a little bit slow, particularly in the beginning, and I think maybe it was because I just didn't like Isaac very much, and I struggled to like read the book from his point of view. But overall, I don't think that interfered with my enjoyment of the book, and I would definitely recommend reading this book. I will say also, previous in the month, I had read the Grady Hendrix How to Sell a Haunted House. In that book, there is like a puppet that is sort of an animated puppet, like he's alive. That's all I'm gonna say. In Thistlefoot, there is a very similar thing where a puppet is sort of like alive. So I thought, what a coincidence that I have read 2 books in 1 month where they have like a puppet come to life. It was interesting and slightly spooky. But this is another book that I would recommend reading like at Halloween. Also maybe like a book club book. I thought it was really good and I enjoyed this book. The final book that I read this month was Cobble Hill by Cecily von Ziegesar. I think, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I would rate this book 2 stars out of 5. So a quick synopsis of this book: you have a cast of characters and they are all located in this area of like New York or Brooklyn or something, I don't know the difference, and it's called Cobble Hill. In the cast of characters you have an author who has like lost his stride and he's trying to write another novel. His wife, who is a high-powered career woman who likes to be in control of everything. You have a school nurse, you have a music teacher, you have an artist who like doesn't play anymore, sort of retired, like this used to be famous kind of guy, a groupie that he married. You also have this husband and wife artist duo, and the wife is very elusive and very strange. And then you have some kids in the mix as well, and essentially this novel is about nothing. It's just sort of a time in their lives, and you kind of get to know these characters and get a peek into their lives. In terms of prose, I thought the writing style was quirky, it was fun, it was entertaining. I think in particular the reason why I was engaged in this book, even though there really wasn't a plot, was because I think the writing style was entertaining. I would compare this book to The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty, which I read I think last month. I'll link the video below where I reviewed it. And it's very similar in the fact that you have this group of people and they're just living their lives around each other and nothing major is really happening. The book was entertaining. I think it was a light read. It was fun. you know, it was fun to pick up at the end of the day and just sort of catch up with the characters, but I don't think it was anything particularly mesmerizing. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend the book unless you're just looking for something casual and easy to read. In terms of cons, I find it frustrating when you read a book and there really is nothing happening. I kept waiting for the bomb to drop, for, you know, something entertaining to happen, and then I got to the very last page and I was like, oh, that's it. I know some people like that kind of book, so if that's your style, definitely this is one for you. I also really struggled with the parenting in this book. Every parent sucks. Every parent is just really not a good parent, I think. And I think in a way the author is commenting on how oftentimes our children can be a lot more wise than we are. But I think that she really overdid this. In particular, there were a couple of parents that really made poor choices to the point of almost neglect. And that was a little bit disturbing to read in such like a comical and lighthearted way. This book was also slightly fat phobic. So that was kind of frustrating to read. As a plus size person myself, I don't ever like reading about fat phobia. I don't ever like seeing it or hearing it. I almost felt like the author put in these fat phobic comments as a way to like spice up the book. They weren't necessary in any way. So let me read this to you. And then there's the fat wife of the musician. Wendy went on mercilessly, still voicing her tipsy, cruel thoughts. She's so beautiful. If she didn't have MS, I'd send her to an agency for plus-size modeling. Even with the MS. She probably always played second fiddle to his music career, and then she got fat having a child, and then she fell ill. She mused, I'm going to help her. There's a couple more things that happen, and then Wendy ends up referring this fat lady to a modeling agency for plus-size models. And there's this whole dynamic in this book about this character, her name is Mandy, and about how Mandy is so fat, but she's so pretty. Like throughout the book, we hear over and over again, wow, she's so curvy, she's so pretty, look at her like voluptuous body. And then also at the same time, like, yeah, she's so fat, she got fat having a kid, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, it's almost like, why are we sitting here saying that a woman who is beautiful and voluptuous cannot also be fat at the same time? Because beauty and fat, they're not exclusionary. Like, you can be fat and you can be beautiful. I feel like the author is like trying to say that, but she's saying it in a very offensive way. And I don't think she's getting across what she's trying to get across. I sort of feel like this is the author's way of trying to bring light to a marginalized group and say it's so silly that we marginalize this group, and like almost to poke fun at the ludicrousness of it. Yet at the same time, she's doing exactly that. I almost feel like she's trying to be ironic about it, and it doesn't feel ironic at all. It feels like she's fulfilling the exact same stereotypes that she's trying to say are ironic. So I just don't really understand that. I mean, like I said, I am not one to support any kind of fat phobia in literature or art or anything like that anyways. But I think the most frustrating piece of this is that I don't think she's trying to be fat phobic. I think she's trying to point out how ridiculous it is that people are fat phobic, and yet she is being fat phobic. So if you are plus size, or if any sort of that language bothers you, I would not read this book because you may be upset by it. This book wasn't for me, and I think that after I finished with it, I was almost just like, why did I waste my time reading that? So this author is actually the author of Gossip Girl, and I never watched Gossip Girl or read the books, but I wonder if her other stuff is a little bit more entertaining and engaging. So if you have read her things, please let me know in the comments below. If you've read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you have any recommendations for me, I usually like fiction, historical fiction. I also like nonfiction, books about stuff. So if you have any recommendations for me, pop them below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on my reviews. If you have differing opinions, or if you agree with me or whatever, drop that below and we can chat in the comments. So thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry this video is a little bit late. Your girl has been busy. this month in June, traveling, done all the things. I've been to 5 different airports within a 30-day period. So I've been busy. We will get back to our regularly scheduled Alaska content. So if you have missed the Alaska cruise content, I will link that playlist below for you. And next video will be another Alaska cruise video for you. So yeah, feel free to subscribe if you want to join the community. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.